Could you briefly tell us about your career and your current position?
Currently, I'm the executive producer of Landline for the ABC. So that's the national rural program for the ABC. And there's a nice sort of synchronicity to it because I was the first presenter of Landline 30 years ago. And I came back a couple of years ago just in time for the 30th anniversary of the program. So it's quite a thrill to be back. And it's also, there's a great responsibility that I should not damage these precious goods because there's a great legacy associated with it. But it's not my first time working at the ABC. I've worked here, as I said, 30 years ago for Landline. And I was here for a couple of years and I went away for a year and I came back for another couple of years. And I think I came back again and worked in radio as well. So this is my fourth tour of duty of the ABC. But I have predominantly worked in commercial television. So I started my cadetship at Channel 9 News in Brisbane. And I was there for not a terribly long time before I went to work for a new national infotainment program, it was called Live at 5. And that led into the Today Show. So I spent 6 years at Channel 9 before I came to the ABC. And then I have also spent probably a good 15 years on and off with Channel 10. So after my second stint at Landline in the 90s, my marriage had ended. I had a 3-year-old daughter and I was only working part-time at Landline. I needed a full-time job and there was no full-time job for me. So I started applying for jobs. I couldn't get anything in Brisbane and I saw a job advertised in the newspaper in Melbourne at Channel 10 for a producer. And I thought, oh, that's just ridiculous because no one ever advertises for those sorts of jobs in the newspaper. People just are appointed, they find someone and they reach out and you are given the job. So I thought, well, look, I need practice at writing job applications. So I did a practice application for that job. And then I got that job, which meant that I had to move to Melbourne with my 3-year-old. And I knew next to no one. I had a couple of old college friends who lived there and a friend from Landline, Pip Courtney, she lived there, but that was it. I didn't know anyone. And took myself off to Melbourne and I became a producer with Channel 10 for a couple of years. But in the time I spent there between 1997 and 2013, I was a producer, a news editor, news manager, and I was the news director in Brisbane, then in Sydney, and then I returned to Brisbane again. I did a stint also working in government for Queensland Health, heading up media comms, online and marketing. And I was there for a couple of years. And then I came to the ABC when the regional division was established in 2015. And I was the regional editor for Queensland for about 2 or 3 years, which was a great job. It was a very difficult job because it involved a lot of change management, but that's me. I think change is my second name. I've always been involved in change management and I'm really lucky. I consider myself that I've never really worked a day in my life because I have loved everything that I have done. I'm a truck driver's daughter from Thargomindah. I was born in Bourke, raised in Thargomindah, high school in Warwick, university in Toowoomba, and the things that I have got to do, the people I have met, the places I have been through this job, whether that be as a reporter, a producer, a presenter, or a manager, it has enriched my life in a way that I could never even have begun to imagine when I was a kid growing up in Thargo.
What's a highlight that you could share with us, and also a low light that you could share with us that has really shaped you as a journalist?
I think a highlight for me is not one particular event, or even though, I have interviewed movie stars and rock stars and living legends, and I have been to incredible places, and I have rappelled out of a helicopter onto the deck of a warship from ships returning from the First Gulf War, and been to amazing remote places and in Australia, and have worked in I spent a few weeks in LA working there as well, and that was amazing. I've done all of those amazing things and met lots of interesting people and who are not celebrities, but they are legends in their own way. But for me, it's the highlight of my career is not so much about one single event, but it's one single period in my career when I was the director of news at Channel 10 here in Brisbane, which was probably about 2004 through to about 2006 or 7. And at that stage, we knew the digital disruption was coming, but it wasn't here yet. And the team that I had in Brisbane, there were a lot of young reporters who were very, very bright, very ambitious, but I don't like to say ambitious in a way that makes them sound like they weren't nice people to be around. They were just ambitious because of the things that they wanted to do in journalism. And there were young journalists and young camera crews, and the crews were incredibly skilled, so they could shoot and edit. And within the 10 network, that was a rarity because generally the camera operators could shoot only and the editors could edit only. And we had people who could do both. Now, during that time, there were bombings in Bali, bombings in Jakarta, riots in the Chinese sector in the Solomon Islands. There was a coup in Fiji. There was the Bali 9. It seemed like we had crews going to Bali every other week. And because we needed operators who could shoot and edit, and we were in Brisbane, so it's a really good jump off point for Southeast Asia. So all of those young people were going and doing those big stories while they were competing with very senior journalists and crews, and often more than one. We were Channel 10, we were shoestring sort of budget, so we would have one crew and they really, really worked hard. We had these young people competing with all these senior people, and they acquitted themselves brilliantly, and they learned from being on the ground. I had never done that, but I lived vicariously through them, and I was on the end of the telephone for them at any hour of the day or night to talk them through scripts, to give them advice, to give them logistical advice as well. I had really good chiefs of staff, really good producers, and everybody pitched in. And when I talked to the people who I worked with at that time, we all agree this was our golden age for us, and it was an incredible highlight. And I guess what I learned out of that was the importance of teamwork, the importance of not having an ego, being willing to put your hand up and say, I'm drowning, not waving, help me. In fact, I actually had a pop art picture on my wall that said that, which was to remind me that I couldn't do everything, but what I could do was to help bring all the very best people and the very best ideas together so that we would succeed. I guess a career low light for me is one that is quite instructional about finding a balance in your life and doing what aligns with your own personal values. When I was offered the opportunity to become the news director for Channel 10 in Sydney, I absolutely jumped at it because this was part of what I had always wanted to do. I wanted to be the first female head of a commercial television network in Australia. So this to me was a stepping stone towards that. And why I say commercial network rather than the ABC. The ABC has always been much more equitable about having female managers, and there's been more, I guess, of a career structure for women at the ABC. There's not really in commercial television, on commercial news. There were some, but not many. And I really wanted to be that person. So I packed up my 2 children. I had married again after my first marriage ended, and then my husband died when I had a little boy who was 2.5. So I had 2 kids, one in year 9 and one in year 3 or 4, and packed up and went to Sydney with the dog and left one dog behind, and took one cat, left one cat behind. to become the director of news in Sydney. And it was a great challenge professionally because there was a lot to do in that newsroom and things that needed to be changed. And because of that golden era that I had lived in Brisbane, the way that we had done things technically were more advanced than what they were doing in Sydney in many ways, even though that was head office. So I was introducing those ideas, once again, introducing change to the way we did things and improving scripting and production and all that sort of stuff. And it was great. And I had great support. I'd like to say that I've always had great support from my managers, my bosses, who have predominantly been men. I had one female EP when I was at Channel 9. All the rest of them were men. I worked really hard, but I didn't know anyone in Sydney. And I'd done that before. I'd gone to Melbourne and I made great friends and had a great career at the same time. But I chose to come back to Queensland because I wanted my daughter to know her family, and it was too far away for her. So when I was in Sydney, no friends. It's very difficult for people that you work with to be friends with the boss. There's a lot of pressure about that. So I had no friends at work. I had no friends at home. I had no family. They were all in Queensland. And I was alone. I was very, very alone. And you can't go on putting out, driving change and striving for excellence if you're not refueling yourself in some way. And there was nothing to refuel me. And I remember going to bed one night and thinking with a great sense of relief that I was going to bed because it was another day over, which meant that I was another day closer to death and I wouldn't have to continue living like this. So that was a real wake-up call to me, was this is ridiculous. Why are you doing this? You know, nothing is worth going to bed wishing you were dead when I've got two gorgeous children and a great career. So I really had a good long think about that. I thought, well, I can't stay here. I need to go back where I've got some support and I can do things that refuel me so that I can continue to do what I want to do. But it meant that I would be giving up my dream of ever becoming that person who was going to head up a television, head of news for a commercial network. So that, as you can imagine, was a big step for me. And when I came back, I really had the distinct feeling that I had failed and I didn't want to talk to anybody about what had happened, but it didn't stop me from thinking about it a lot. And I thought about it a lot. And I have no regrets now for making that decision because, as it turned out, there was a change of ownership at that network. They would have fired me anyway because they were doing a clean sweep. So basically I left before I came back to Brisbane and worked hard in Brisbane. And when there were redundancies, I decided that I would see my first tranche of redundancies out the door and make sure they were all taken care of. And then I would leave because I didn't want to work there anymore because it didn't align with my values and my journalistic values about how I wanted to tell stories. And so I left, and that's when I went to work for government. So that was my low light, but the upside of the low light is that I don't have any regrets about doing it. It was the right thing for me to do for myself.
Do you think it's something about needing to have more emphasis on prioritizing your mental health, not just prioritizing your career?
I think it's very important to actually think a lot more about yourself and how you're coping than what I thought it was important. I just thought you just bowled on and you just did it. Well, you don't. You actually have to have some support. And I am the absolute worst person to ask about work-life balance, even though I've raised 2 kids. Because, like I said, I love my work, so I don't feel like I've ever worked. So my regular day has always been pretty much 9 hours a day. But I would come home at night and I would cook a family meal when they were older in particular. When they were younger, I had people there, you know, carers who would come and and bath them and feed them before I got home from work because it was a bit late. But for me, my creative outlet became, well, we have to eat, so I'll make it interesting. So I became a really good cook, and my kids have pretty good taste in food now. So I would come home and I would cook, and that would help me unwind. I also have always had pets, so you have to take care of them. So you have to walk the dogs, right? So I've also had chickens. You have to feed the chickens. So all of these things that made me do other things, and also gardening. So it's one of those very therapeutic things where you have to give for it to give back to you. But for me, it just puts me in another place, in another mode where I stop thinking about work. But strangely enough, I seem to solve a lot of problems about work while I'm doing those things and not thinking about it. So it's really important to find something that is different from your work. So you're not, for me anyway, I can't speak for everybody else, but so that I'm not just sitting there reading newspapers or reading journals or magazines or watching television or, drama series on TV. I don't do that. I seem to try and avoid it at all costs and spend lots of time outside the house. So it's really important to do those things. Once again, it's refueling so that you have that creative energy, so you can keep coming up with ideas, particularly when you get to a position where you're in a leadership role, which I have been for a very long time in one way or another. So everybody is looking to you to make the decisions. It doesn't really matter if it's the right decision. It's just that you can make a decision and you can be flexible. If that decision doesn't work, well, that didn't work. Let's try this. What do you think? And not actually managing by committee, but you still have to have that inner, got to recharge your batteries so that you've got the energy to lead other people and make decisions and not let people down, and make sure that your program goes to air, or those positions that are free in Mount Isa are, for the journalist are filled, so that everything happens. And you can't do that unless you're putting something back into yourself.
I was wondering if you've ever felt like you've experienced burnout during your career, and how did you go about dealing with that?
I think when looking back on it, that I experienced burnout when I was in my mid to late 20s. So I was on a pretty steep career trajectory. I was doing really well in my career, and new opportunities were opening up to me. And yet, when it came to the end of the year, and this is when I was working for programs that went into recess at the end of the year over summer, I would go into that summer recess and I would cry. I would just cry a lot. And I could never work out why I was crying, because I was certainly achieving what I wanted to achieve and doing everything that I had set out to do. But all the tears. I think I never felt that I was good enough. I had there was a woman who worked in Brisbane media who we were the same age. And I always felt that I was inferior to her, that she was smarter, prettier, richer, lived in a better suburb, drove a better car, and was always going to have a better career than me, because I just wasn't as good in my own head. So I don't know whether I was pegging myself against her and feeling disappointed that I wasn't getting beyond her. But I think that was burnout, because I was working very, very hard to do everything right, and not having that balance. And I think that's really important. I can talk about it now when I'm, approaching 60, about having a work-life balance and finding something else, because I've been doing it for over 3 decades. So I've learned that. But very early on in my career, I did not know that. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that you still need to be refueling yourself, even if you're 26. So don't go and spend your holidays crying like I did.
When you were in your mid to late 20s and you were having that burnout, did you ever have doubts about staying in journalism? Did you think maybe this isn't for me, maybe I want to try something different? Did you ever have those kinds of doubts?
No, never had those thoughts at all. I just always thought that I would be involved in journalism one way or another. If not as a reporter, it would be as a producer, because I could see even in those very early formative years that producers had a bigger say in how the stories or the programs would develop. And even though that wasn't a properly formulated idea to me at the time, it's one that I could see that it could be appealing. And as it turned out, I went from being a presenter to a producer and became a much better journalist as a result, and have been able to apply my skills that I used as a reporter to be a good producer, as a presenter to be a good producer. And when I've had to flip that and go back to being a reporter or a presenter, whether that be on radio or television, all of that meshed really, really well together and made me a much better journalist overall.
What do you think are the skills that journalists should be honing in the current media landscape?
I would say digital skills, definitely. If you work in print, it's natural that you'll have those digital skills anyway. You may not have broadcast skills, but there's a possibility that you could become a broadcaster. You could work in radio as a radio producer, or you could work in radio as a radio digital producer, which means that you're finding stories that will be told on the radio, but also they're going to be written up for online as well. They're going to be repurposed into social media stories as well. So I would say having a digital skill, radio journalists should have it, TV journalists should have it, and print journalists should have it as well, because we are living in a digital world. We're doing this digitally. This is something that we wouldn't have been able to do 10 years ago, and it's given us great freedom, but it also means that we need to have better skills and at least understand how things work. So when I came to the ABC in 2015, I knew that I had a huge gap in my resume. There was no digital at all. And now I know how digital works. I know what types of stories will work on digital. I know, for an online news story, I know it's going to work for a short form video. I know it's going to work for an Instagram story. I know all of those things. This year, I had the opportunity to do some backfill on radio. I hadn't done that for 18 years, but that was a lot of fun and it scared the life out of me, but I'm glad I did it. And one of the stories that I did, which was an interview with a woman who is technically homeless because she couch surfs and she house sits and doesn't have a fixed address. She's my age, from a nice middle class background. So that was a fairly powerful story that I did an interview for the radio, and that was then written up for an online story, which performed really, really well.
How important do you think regional journalism is in this day and age?
I think it's extraordinarily important. Regional journalism is very, very important, because I firmly believe that people who live in the regions have a right to a voice, and regional journalism provides them with that voice. Their stories have a right to be told as much as anyone who lives in a metropolitan area or a city or a big regional city. The ABC has done a lot to make sure that regional voices are heard. And that's part of its charter, is to make sure every Australian voice is heard and that the ABC connects to its community. Commercial journalism in the regions has shrunk. And in fact, last year I was involved on a panel to award grants which came from Google to regional journalism. They were tied in with COVID because a lot of those newspapers and broadcasts or online publications had all shrunk because of no one was going out, they had no advertising. So that exposed me to the breadth of journalism that still does exist in the regions. Even though the big players all contracted, it was an enlightening experience and an enriching experience, and it gave me hope that there are still small operators out there telling stories to their own community. And you'll never hear of them if you live in the cities, and you don't need to, and they don't want you to, but they are servicing their community. So while the big players may have come out they are being replaced by smaller operators, and that's a lot of hard work for them, but rewarding.
Has there been a shift in general in the type of journalism and the type of stories that have been told in the region?
They'll always be the same stories, will always be told. Basically, you can change the names, the dates, and the locations, and they will still be told as news stories because they are news events of the day that happen. And so I'm talking about, disaster stories, hero stories, tragedies, crime, all of those stories. They will still continue to be told. But certainly, from what I have seen in my experience here at the ABC, there is more of an effort to connect and tell people stories, and to tell the stories of those people who haven't had a voice either. They haven't been seen. So more diverse stories, more stories about people who've come from somewhere else, or they've come from somewhere else a long time ago and had a long history that has not been seen or recognised, or just new skills that they've brought to the region. So stories about refugees and how they have changed life in regional centres and towns, backpackers who come from all over the world and the impact that they've had on culture, and also a lot of them stay and they marry people and they end up living here. And that changes the culture as well. And certainly there's been a real shift towards Indigenous recognition and telling the stories of the First Nations peoples. And the environment and climate are much more common now than what they ever were before.
With the idea that more people may be moving to the regions, that might change, I guess, the way that journalism is approached to. Will it make a change?
Yes, it will make a change. It depends on how long those newcomers or refugees from the cities, how long they stay, whether or not, the lifestyle is the one that they want, and whether they have the schools and the hospitals and all those sort of things that you need to have. So, but if they stay, yes, I think that will change the type of journalism, because it's going to change the culture of the town. So you might have a town that really, didn't have a lot of newcomers there, but then you have an influx of tree changers who come and they bring different ideas. So they can be absorbed certainly into the community, but they can also bring those new ideas. And so there will be new stories to tell that come from those new people, and that will, I think, change the way stories are told in journalism.
How did you get involved with women in media, and what are the benefits of being involved with women in media?
I'm one of the founding members in Queensland of Women in Media. It was sort of born here after a Worklife presentation night. And even though I wasn't working I was working for Queensland Health at the time, so I wasn't working in media strictly. And there was a small group of us. We didn't really know what we were doing, but what we wanted to do is to make sure that that women were given opportunities to pursue their career, to be paid equally, and that they'd have an understanding and support that perhaps careers don't always go like that. They can go like that and down and change, particularly because there are a lot of women who work in media. Women are still the primary caregivers. They're the ones who take time off to have kids. They're the ones who come back on a part-time capacity. How is all that going to work? And how can we help them? What can we give them? So we're now, I think, 6 years down the track from that. And in that time, we have organised 2 national conferences. So we had great speakers for women to come along and listen to and learn from by those people who shared their own experience. We have a mentoring program, which, we've always had, but it's better now than it ever has been. And here in Queensland, we also have a Career Boost Scholarship, which is a $5,000 annual scholarship for mid-career women who are those women who have had a really good career, go off and have their kids, and then come back and go, oh yeah, just resume my career. But then it's like, what's next? I don't really know if I want to continue doing this. So how can I improve myself so that I can gather those extra skills so that I can try something different within media? Because journalism skills are incredibly transferable. They will carry you anywhere and into lots of different roles. So We have all of those, those things that we offer our members, and also a whole lot of fun. We have speakers and just networking events where we all get together and have a good time and catch up. And we're also, as women in media, we get calls from people from all around state or interstate with problems. I've got this problem. You know, how do I deal with bullying? Should I take this job in New Zealand or should I go to Canberra? You know, these sort of questions come in all the time. Or can you recommend someone who's a good voice coach? So we're just there to do, as I said earlier, to do for others what you would like to have done for yourself, and to give that to people. It's we sort of talk to it about throwing down the net, not like throwing down the ladder to help people up, but throwing down the whole damn fishing net so as many people as possible can climb up and have an advantage and achieve what it is that they want to achieve. It takes a bit of time. I think it's going to be my epitaph, really, is that success is the best revenge. So when you're progressing along on your career, and whether it's you experiencing self-doubt or other people doubting your ability and not thinking that you are ever going to make it, just keep going. Keep going as long as it aligns with how you feel inside and what your values are. Because in my case, I had serious doubters when I first started, and I had my own serious doubts. And I have overcome that. I have overcome the doubts of the other people who have now gone on to be very proud of me and my achievements. And I am successful, and I don't need to go back to them and say, see, I told you so. I don't need to do that. So revenge is a nasty word, but success negates that. You'll feel like an imposter at times, and people will make you feel like an imposter. But if you really truly believe that is what you want to do and it feels right and it's not costing you your mental health, you should do it. Keep going. It's worth it.